Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour. First, I would like to apologize for my voice. I hope I will not lose it during the presentation. Um, today's session will focus on the legal tools developed so far by the Secretariat to help countries and other parties to implement the Stockholm Convention, which is an international legal instrument under their national law through appropriate legal framework. So we will present the tools that we've developed so far to assist countries to that end. So first, regarding the Stockholm Convention, where do we get the mandate for developing these tools? If you look at these provisions which are now appearing on the page of the presentation, you may note that Article 3, Article 5, 6, and 7 refer to measures that parties have to adopt in order to fulfill certain specific obligations under the Stockholm Conventions. And in particular, they have to adopt an adequate legal framework, which may be composed of legislative and administrative measures. Legislative refers to what we call what lawyers refer to as the Acts of Parliament, and most of the time, as this international treaty is about very technical subject matters. If you look at the national experience, what states have chosen to adopt as legal tool as measures to implement this convention is mostly regulation, which are decisions, measures coming from administrative authorities, like, for example, very specialized subsidiary bodies of the government, like chemical agencies, because indeed it may go faster and be more efficient than going through the whole legislative process. Usually, the parliament in a country is composed of two chambers, and it takes quite some time to go through the whole legislative process. So to regulate POPs in particular, what happens if we look at case studies, for example, is that environmental protection agencies usually adopt regulations, and to that end, lawyers as well as chemists and other very technical and scientific persons do work hand in hand to actually draft these regulations. Next, so to date, what tools are available? We have developed first a guide which helps at developing national legal frameworks to implement the convention on POPs. So this is a document, Word document, composed of more or less 30 pages. We have put it on the web, so it is now available under the section on legal matters, other resources, which you may find on the Stockholm Convention website. We'll also send you these documents as well as the other tools by emails after the presentation, so that you may have these tools for yourself and look at them with time more closely. So this guide is like for the other two chemicals convention, aims at giving directions, advices as to how a national legal frameworks may be composed to efficiently implement this international legal instrument, which is the Stockholm Convention. Most of all, and this is a request that came a lot, especially during technical assistance activities, we have started to develop legal case studies, for example, taken from desk studies, which have been undertaken under very specific projects. And so far, we have focused on 3 countries, which we have chosen because of the geographical representativity last week I talked also with our regional center in Brazil, so we are soon to add the case studies regarding Brazil to have also the South American region represented. And these legal case studies, well, apparently they've been widely requested during our technical assistance workshop because they help in actually they contribute in sharing information and experience, and especially concrete experience regarding also different levels of development that countries face. So we will go through one of them a bit later in the presentation so that you may have an idea as to how these legal case studies are presented. We are planning to have them developed in different languages, translate these first three ones in the other UN official languages, Spanish, French mainly. And we hope to develop more throughout the different geographical zone, and also maybe more specific ones depending on the chemicals that are targeted. Also, another legal tool that we have developed, and actually we got inspired because, well, as we'll see later, we're trying to have an integrated approach with the other Chemicals and Waste Convention. And this checklist was first initiated for the Basel Convention. So we've developed one under the Stockholm Convention as well, and for the Rotterdam Convention, as you will see from other webinar sessions, which will take place at the early beginning of 2014. So this checklist for the legislator, we'll go through it quickly later on. It's a Word document in a few pages, and which in the form of a recap table summarize the different obligations that actually have to take form of legal or administrative measures and that need to be implemented through a legal framework. So it's done in the form of a checklist so that any legal and policymaker in a national jurisdiction can take this document as a comparison and take it as a list, go through it, tick which ones, when drafting a regulation or a legislation, which one have been actually integrated in the law, and which one still needs to be integrated. So this is a reference document which can quickly help in going through the essential requirements that are set out under the Stockholm Convention and that needs to be reflected in a national legal framework. So they are all available on our website now. You may consult this very specific link, and you will be directed to the sections where you can find these documents. Also, one thing which is very important, and one thing which we look at first as lawyers, especially when we deliver technical assistance to the parties that need it, we look first at the type of legal system that we're facing in a national situation. And we look at the constitutional system because you have two main traditions in law. You have common law countries, and on one hand, and on the other hand, you have more civil law and more codified type of legal system. And depending on this, the tools that will be chosen as component of this implementing legal framework will depend on this tradition. And as an international lawyer, what we also look at is what type of international tradition applies in the country, because in some countries, especially the civil law and codified one, the legal framework is made of a sort of pyramid, and at the top of this pyramid you often have when the conception is a monist conception, meaning that the law is just one group and there is no separation between the national sphere and the international sphere. And at the top of this pyramid you find most of the time the international treaties and conventions that have been ratified, accepted approved and access to by the country. So in this particular type of situation, it makes things easier. And for example, we went with colleagues to Ivory Coast and to deliver some technical assistance workshop. And in this particular country, this was the tradition and the type of legal systems they had. It means that, for example, an international treaty is directly applicable without transposition, without national transposition measure. And for example, in front of a judge at a court, when there is a particular case, and in Ivory Coast it was the particular case of the Probo Koala that we were dealing with. In this case, the citizens can directly prevail themselves from the and can directly rely on an international treaty. Otherwise, there's another type of a legal system where national law is one thing and international is another thing, and it absolutely require an act from Parliament to actually implement a treaty that has been ratified. So parties will have a look at sorry, will have to have a look at that in order to sorry, to to adopt an implementing legal framework. Sorry. Next, so what tools are we planning to develop in the future? Apologies again. We're planning to actually, in order to better share national experience and information, collect the national legislations or regulations that parties may have adopted to implement the Stockholm Convention, and with their consent, post them on the website so that all other parties can actually have a good source of information to see how concretely the other parties have implemented the Stockholm Convention. Also, one thing which is very important is the Conference of the Parties, which provides actually a forum for you, for parties, to voice their needs in terms of legal tools, and indeed a secretariat who can act depending on the mandate we have and we receive. So if there are any specific needs regarding this, the development of very specific tools, for example, under the Basel Convention, parties have mandated the Secretariat to develop a model legislation. Under the Stockholm Convention, as well as the Rotterdam Convention, this was not possible because parties didn't actually want to have this model legislation. And therefore, this is why we have just developed this checklist, which is this document which allows the policy and lawmakers to quickly go through what legislation may contain, legislation regulating POPs. We're also planning, as I mentioned earlier, to have more case studies. And so please, you're welcome to share your national experiences. It may be either environmental ministries, specific environmental agencies, or like I discussed the case last week with our regional center in Brazil. It may also be through these regional centers that we can work together and actually develop these case studies that will be then translated and put on the web for better information sharing and experience sharing. So the conclusion is, are we going towards a synergetic joint legal tool package? This is what we are actually going through because of the synergies process which have been engaged since a few years ago between the Chemicals and Waste Convention. And we welcome you to join our next webinars, which will be more specifically focused on the Rotterdam Convention and then the Basel Convention. And as part of the synergies process, we still have to bear in mind the legal the principle of the legal autonomy of each of these treaties, and therefore this is why we have split our webinar session in three, but still we can still, following this integrated approach, develop these tools, respecting the mandates that that the parties to each convention give us. We also recommend within this integrated approach, and following this approach, to actually also refer to the more general tools regarding chemicals management, developed also with our colleagues. We're working with on that, our colleague from UNEP Chemicals, and we're also working more generally with DELC in order to actually develop these tools for mainstreaming chemicals management. So, and if you would like to have more information about this, we can get in touch after this presentation, and we will direct you to these more general tools. So this is it for the presentation. I will quickly go through two legal tools: the checklist for the legislator and the case studies which has been developed concerning Canada. So if you go through the checklist for the legislator, and if you scroll down on your screen to go through the document, you may notice that this checklist is presented under the form of a recap table. You have two main colors which are used, which is yellow to actually highlight the obligations under the Stockholm Convention, which are very general, like, for example, the protection of human health and the environment, which is contained in the provisions of Article 1. And then in light blue, you may notice all these very specific and technical obligations which are connected to the chemicals considered as POPs and which are listed in annexes to the convention. And among them, you have this obligation to adopt measures, whether legislative or administrative measures, to, for example, reduce or eliminate releases of POPs from intentional or unintentional production. So this is how this presents itself. And you see, we go back to the yellow color when we deal with more general obligations: information exchange, public information, awareness and education, the development of national implementation plans, which will actually help us indeed to develop these case studies. If we go through the Canada case studies, you will first have an introduction about the sort of diagnosis as to POPs in Canada, and also get the profile of the country in terms of level of development and population, and so actually an identity card of the country of which the case studies is made. And then later on in the case studies, you will have a mapping of how the legal framework regarding chemicals in general, and more specifically regarding POPs, is composed, and you will have the mention of very specific national legal instruments which contribute in the implementation of the Stockholm Convention. So this is right after the diagnosis of POPs, which is a more technical part in Canada. So what is interesting is that you will have a comparison between the statutes of chemicals management regime before the Stockholm Convention entered into force for Canada, and then you will have in another part the statutes after the Stockholm Convention came into force. And these sections will recap the existing legislation and policy which contribute to implement the Stockholm Convention. So this is how we present these case studies, and the other case studies will follow the same schemes. And so very precise references to the specific acts. Acts are legislative measures, so meaning legal instruments which went through the legislative process and through Parliament. So you may notice that Canada has chosen this way for actually various aspects of chemical management and POPs. And if you would like more information with these very precise reference to these measures, you may actually go through this particular legislation and see very precisely how Canada has covered all the aspects of chemicals management, and in particular POPs under the Stockholm Convention. You may find very general acts as well as very specific legislation. But in general, as I mentioned earlier, what countries have chosen to do is actually to draft regulations in order to avoid going through the for so specific and technical area that are POPs, to go through the whole legislative and parliament process and actually gain time and benefit from the expertise of the officials that are actually working for this very specific subsidiary bodies of government, which are the environmental protection agencies or chemicals agencies. So this is how, for example, the legal study is presented, and indeed in these diagnoses you will positive elements will be highlighted and gaps also will be identified, and every specific aspects covered by the Stockholm Convention will in principle be analyzed in these case studies. So this is it for the presentation on my side. I hope it gave you some helpful keys and tools regarding the implementation of the Stockholm Convention through adequate legal frameworks. Of course, this first presentation is actually a door open to more questions that we will go through in the second part of this webinar. And at any time thereafter, if you have any questions, if you would like to make suggestions, and also if you would like to share your experience, please please do so. It will be very much appreciated. So please don't hesitate to contact us again after this presentation. Thank you very much. Merci. Gracias.